The Passion of St. Walter. Now, if you know me, you know I'm a huge Disney fan, and I make no apologies for that. You may think it's a heresy to say St. Walter, but I hope to show you today there's a lot of things that Walt Disney believed and practiced that would benefit all of us, would benefit our church, would benefit us in our relationships with other people. But I love Disney. I love going to their parks. I like their movies. I like the way they run their business, and I don't want to brag or anything, but Mickey Mouse is a close personal friend of mine. And if you don't believe me, just look. Autographed and everything, see?
That's hilarious.
Yeah, somebody earlier said there was a resemblance there, but I'm not sure what that means. Why do I like Walt Disney so much? The man was a visionary. The man had incredible passion, incredible ideas, and he had the fortitude to stick with it once he got started, in spite of sometimes amazing adversity. Now, the picture that you see right now is of a young Walt Disney. We don't often see pictures of him at this stage in his life. The picture is rare because of that, but it's also rare because it's one of the few pictures you will find where Walt Disney is not smiling. Almost every picture I could find of him online, he's got a big smile on his face because he liked life. He loved life. He loved the adventure he was on and looked forward to every day of it, something that we could all learn from also. Walt Disney loved to draw from the time he was a child. He wanted nothing more than to draw cartoons, and this was in the infancy of animated cartoons. In fact, it was still during the silent era of film when he started trying to make his own cartoons. He and a partner set up their own little studio in the Midwest where he was from, and they tried to make cartoons, and nobody was really interested, and their business went bankrupt. So he started another company called Laugh-O-Gram and thought, okay, this is the one. Laugh-O-Gram is the one. Well, of course, the Laugh-O-Gram company went nowhere also. It went bust. So Walt and his brother Roy decided to move to where the movie business had relocated in recent years, which was Hollywood. So they made the train trip west to Hollywood and set up their own studio, Disney Brothers Studio. And they began to make more animated cartoons. They were trying something very experimental. They made a series of cartoons called the Alice cartoons, which featured a live girl with an animated background, which was very tricky because this was before they had clear animation cells to paint on, you know. So they had to animate on regular paper, which meant you couldn't make it layers. You just had to draw it on a piece of paper, and then they had to superimpose the picture of this young girl interacting with these cartoon characters. And if you see any of those Alice cartoons, they're pretty rudimentary, and but it was the best they could do at the time. And they got a little bit of attraction. People thought, okay, those are kind of neat. But Walt Disney was still looking for his first big break. And so one day he came up with the idea for an animated character, a little rodent with big ears. And he decided to make some cartoons featuring this little rodent with big ears. And of course, I'm talking about Oswald the Rabbit. Ever seen an Oswald the Rabbit cartoon? They actually were popular. They were starting to catch on. People liked this little guy, thought he was cute. He has a certain resemblance to somebody you may know. But for the first time, Walt was starting to have some success with the Oswald cartoons. And his studio and the cartoons were financed by a company back east, and he liked making the cartoons, but he felt like they were really having to scrimp and they weren't really making much money. Everything was going right back into the next cartoon. So Walt made the long train trip from Hollywood back to New York to talk to his bosses. And his plan was to ask them for more money so that they could make the cartoons better, they could pay their people more, and maybe Walt might even be able to make a few bucks off of his handiwork instead of just barely scraping by. He thought, surely they will go along with this. Well, he went and had his meeting in New York, and it didn't turn out quite like he expected. In fact, his boss said, you need to read your contract. You don't own the rights to this character. And in fact, we don't even need you to make these cartoons. They hired all of Walt's animators right out from under him and told him they didn't need him anymore. So this character that he created, he didn't even own anymore. And so he made the long, long train trip back to California feeling like he had lost everything. This was his first taste of success, and now it's been yanked away from him, and somebody's told him, no, we own your idea. There's nothing you can do about it. And on his train trip, when he was at the lowest ebb of his professional career at that point, he thought, what am I going to do next? What am I going to come up with next? And so he remembered that when he was a kid, in his room at home, he had a little mouse that would come into his room at night. And he kind of would feed the mouse, and it kind of became a pet to him. So he thought, well, instead of this rabbit, what if I made a mouse instead? And so he started sketching. He had a lot of basic ideas down, and there wasn't a whole lot of difference between the original drawings for Oswald and the original drawings for his new creation. He drew this little mouse and thought, that looks like something I could have fun with. I could make a good character out of that. He got home to California, told his wife, I've come up with a new character. She said, what is it? He said, it's Mortimer Mouse. She said, that's a stupid name for a character. Why don't you call him Mickey? And thus was born Walt Disney's crowning creation. In the depths of the Depression, Mickey Mouse pops out of Walt Disney's head. And the rest, as they say, is history. That's the road that made all the difference right there. So he began to make cartoons featuring Mickey Mouse, and he quickly realized, I want to do something that's cutting edge. I'm not going to do just a cartoon. I want to do a cartoon that has sound. Now, sound was not even in motion pictures at this time. It was an experimental thing Walt Disney decided he was going to throw in with this kind of unproven technology. And so he came out with the first Mickey Mouse cartoon, which was called Steamboat Willie. And it was a huge success. People could not get enough of this character called Mickey Mouse. And they began to crank out Mickey Mouse cartoon after Mickey Mouse cartoon. And within just a couple of years, Mickey Mouse was one of the most famous characters in the world, not just the United States, but worldwide, as recognizable as Charlie Chaplin was at the height of his fame. You know, language was no barrier. Mickey Mouse cartoons could be shown all over the world, and people found them just wonderful. They couldn't wait to see the next one. But Walt Disney was never content to rest on his laurels. He never forgot his first big success here. And this is a quote he often said later in life. I only hope we don't lose sight of one thing, that it was all started by a mouse. Now, sometimes when we have some success in life, we tend to forget what brought us to that point. Or we tend to devalue it and say, well, I did that when I was young. It wasn't really anything. Walt Disney never devalued Mickey Mouse. In fact, he was his hero. He was his biggest hero. He loved Mickey Mouse more than a lot of people he knew. And he continued wanting to push the envelope, though. What do you do? Okay, we're making these Mickey Mouse cartoons. Everybody loves them. What can we do to push the envelope? We've got sound in them, but how can we make it better? Well, there was new technology at the time called Technicolor. And Walt Disney decided he would make the first cartoons in full color. And everybody said, Walt, that's going to be way too expensive. But Walt's idea was to make a series of cartoons called Silly Symphonies. And the selling point of these cartoons was that they featured beautiful orchestral music. Not just rinky-tink piano like some cartoons did. You know, in the Depression, most people could never hear a symphony orchestra, except on a scratchy Victrola or something. But Walt Disney said, no, you can hear this beautiful orchestral music and see this vivid color and these amazing sights unfold right on your screen. And so he began to produce a whole series of silly symphonies that really captured the imagination of people. Everybody told him it wouldn't work, but it did work. Well, what's the next step then? Well, the next step was, okay, our cartoons are doing great. They're full color, they've got sound, they're animated, people love them. What if we made a feature-length animated cartoon? Well, at this point, even his best friends and his brother told him, Walt, this is crazy. He spent 3 years animating Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And many times during the process, people said, you're going to lose everything on this. They borrowed money to finance it. He called in every favor he could get. He had regular meetings with his banker to try to stave off bankruptcy one more day. And finally, after 3 years of work, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premiered. And of course, we know the story. It was massively successful and began a long chain of classic Disney features, which continues right up to today. Snow White is probably one of the first movies many of us ever saw. And we saw it as children. We showed it to our children as children. We show it to our grandchildren and maybe even our great-grandchildren. It's something that has never gotten old, which is another great feature of Walt Disney and his imaginations. He loved timeless stories, things that would not expire depending on who was in the White House or how the economy was doing. He made timeless stories and people responded to them. But he insisted that they keep working on it till it was right, even if everybody else says it was going to fail. That same trait came into play in the mid-50s when he had an idea for a park, a theme park called Disneyland. Now bear in mind, at the time Walt Disney dreamed this up, there was no such thing as a theme park. If you wanted to take your family out somewhere, you basically had two alternatives. You could go to a park, where there were trees and picnic tables and maybe a swing set, or you could take them to a carnival. And carnivals at the time were not always family-friendly places. The rides were frequently held together with baling wire and duct tape and never inspected, and the people working at carnivals were not the most savory bunch. They were sometimes the dregs of society, and a lot of families would never consider taking their children to a carnival because of the bad influence it might be. But Walt Disney had this idea that there should be a place where families could go and it would be a total break from the world outside. And so he began talking to his crew about what this Disneyland would look like. And they mapped it out many different ways and arranged it many different ways. And the way they produced it was just genius. How many of you have been to Disneyland in California? Okay, have you noticed that Disneyland is laid out like a wheel? You enter on the spokes of a wheel. And what's at the center of the wheel?
Castle.
Whose castle? It's Sleeping Beauty's castle, depending on if you go there or Florida. One is Sleeping Beauty, one is Cinderella. But it's a beautiful castle, and it's the first thing you see when you come into the park. You're on Main Street, USA, and there's that castle right in front of you. And you can go all the way to the center, and then from the center, other spokes branch out in other ways. This one goes to Adventureland. This one goes to Tomorrowland. This one goes to Frontierland. And depending on which spoke you go, you get a whole different world. And this was a totally new thing. And everybody told Walt, this is going to kill you. This is going to put you out of business for good. Even his closest friends and advisors said, that park is going to close within a year. It cost $17 million in the mid-50s to build it. Of course, it would be 50, 100 times that much now. But he persevered against all costs. He called in, again, every favor. He mortgaged his house. He second mortgaged his house. He borrowed against his own life insurance. He put every penny he could scrape together into making Disneyland a reality. Now, that's not to say that on opening day everything went smoothly. There was a lot of hitches in the system that first day when they opened. It was on live television, coast to coast. And some places like where they had poured asphalt for walkways, it had not completely set. It was a very, very hot day that day. Women's high heels were sticking in the asphalt and they were walking right out of their shoes. Half of the bathrooms didn't work. The crowd was huger, much huger than they expected, and half of the bathrooms didn't work. Not all the concession stands were ready. A lot of them ran out of food. But yet people walked in and were amazed at this new world that Walt Disney had created. And man, it has been no looking back since then. Walt said, Disneyland will never be finished. It is something we will always be refining and tweaking and working on. And that philosophy has continued throughout the day. I was talking to someone earlier this morning If you stay all day at a Disney park and you stay till they say, all right, the gates are closing, and you leave, as soon as those gates are locked, you should see what happens in there. A whole crew of hundreds of people come swelling out from under the ground. In the Magic Kingdom, they do come from underground. And they spend the whole night repainting surfaces, repairing things, planting new flowers in the flower beds, touching up anything that might have been slightly scuffed the day before, so that the next day the people that come in when the gate opens, it looks like a brand new place. Because in a sense it is. That commitment to quality has made Walt Disney into the brand that we know and trust today. So what are some of the lessons we can learn from Walt Disney? Well, one, you see him here with his two daughters, and this is sort of exemplifying one thing he really believed, and that is the importance of telling a story. Now, we all know Disney movies. We all know the stories they tell and the messages that we can find in those movies. But did you know every ride at a Disney park tells a story? If you ride on Splash Mountain, there's actually a plot to it. There's an intro to it. There's a part where it starts to get exciting. There's a part where it starts to build drama and conflict, and you start thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to fall off this hill. We're going to go careening down this chute into the water down there. And then, of course, there's a happy resolution, and you get off the ride and say, let's do that again. But the cool thing about Disney that not a lot of other parks seem to have caught on with is that the story is not just while you're on the ride. Walt Disney wants to tell you a story while you're standing in line even. And that's a big difference. When I was growing up, when I was a kid, we never could have made it to Disneyland. But we did get to go to Six Flags every now and then. And I thought that was pretty cool till I went to a Disney park. And I just remember at Six Flags standing in those cattle chutes in those lines that just go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on a hot Texas day, and you're just sweating thinking, when are we going to get on the ride? And there's nothing to see, there's nothing to do, nothing to hold your attention, and you get cranky and irritable. Disney eliminates that. And while you're standing in a line, they got stuff going on. They got characters, they got robots doing things, they got screens everywhere, they got people walking by singing. They got amazing things going on everywhere you look. I saw a video this week of a woman that's on the team that is the custodial team at Disney World. You think, oh, how exciting, you know. You get to go and pick up trash. And she has constant interaction with people that visit Disney World. And she's developed this skill. She takes her broom and dips it in her water bucket, and she draws Disney characters on the sidewalk with water and her broom. And so there's a crowd of people standing around watching the custodian at Disney World. Those kind of touches are what make it a step above. That attention to detail, that idea that every minute you're in our world, we want you to feel safe, we want you to be entertained, we want you to have something to pay attention to. But Walt Disney also knew that stories are what we remember. Now, I've told you many times in this class that I believe each of us is a story, that we are writing a story every day that we live. You are the author of your story. And so if you're living a boring book, it's your fault. A lot of times people that get to our age say, well, I'm just coasting till the end here. That means the last 30, 40 pages of your book are blank. Who wants to read that book? But you know what? Every day you turn a new page in that book, and tomorrow you could write something amazing on that page. You could do something outside your comfort level. You could do something challenging. You could do something that is a dream of yours. And think how that would make your story better. The author, Donald Miller, who wrote a book called Blue Like Jazz, he realized the same thing a few years ago, that he was living a story, and his story was kind of dull. And he thought, I'm going to start doing things just because they'll make a better story. Now, he was a guy who was chubby and overweight, and he decided he was going to ride his bicycle from the West Coast to the East Coast. That'd be a challenge if you were Lance Armstrong, but for a guy who was 30 pounds overweight, that was a huge challenge. But he did it, and it made a great story. In fact, it made a whole book, and it changed the way he lives his life, because he lives his life now to make a story better. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about the story you're living? Would anybody want to read your story? If page after page is the same dull thing. What a sad way to live your life when you could have adventure on every page, when you could have romance, when you could have excitement, when you could have challenge, when you could have goal achieving, when you could have triumph over adversity on the next page in your book. Wouldn't that be cool? You're the author. You can do that. And Walt Disney tells us that story is key. Another lesson we learn from Walt Disney has to do with this character, Peter Pan. Peter Pan, the boy who never grew up. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's not a good thing to never grow up. But one message Disney sends us over and over again is to keep the child inside you alive. You know, when I was standing next to Mickey Mouse, I was 50-something years old. I was as excited, if not more so, than my daughter was. Now, why? I know this is a person in a costume, but yet this is an icon from my childhood. I've known Mickey Mouse almost as long as I've known Jesus. And here I was standing next to him in this perfect world that's been created, in this little cartoony house that's all round corners and cool looking stuff, and you're ushered in and there's Mickey Mouse standing there and he's just clapping his hands with excitement to see you. It's pretty cool, no matter what age you are. From 2 years old to 92 years old, you'll see people at Disney World and you'll see them with big smiles on their face just taking in the delight of everything. Because Disney knows how to appeal to the childlike wonder in all of us. Walt Disney once said, "Why do we have to grow up?" He said, "I know a few adults who have the children's approach to life. Those people don't care what the Joneses do. You see them at Disneyland every time you go there. They are not afraid to be delighted with simple pleasures. And they have a degree of contentment with what life has brought them, even if life hasn't brought them very much at all." Now, that sounds just like Scripture to me. That sounds just like the Apostle Paul saying, "I have learned whatsoever my state to be content." And Walt Disney and Jesus would say, you don't have to just be content with your life. You can be excited about your life. You can look forward to waking up every day just to see what's going to happen next. Life is not supposed to be tolerated. It's supposed to be celebrated. It's supposed to be anticipated. It's supposed to be exciting. It's not supposed to be, oh, well, maybe tomorrow I'll be better. But that's the way a lot of us live. Who needs to change? You do. Your life is not dull because dull things are out in the world looking for you. Your life is dull because you've chosen a dull page in your book. Keep a childlike sense of wonder alive in you. It will reward you many, many, many times. Now, part of keeping that child alive has to do with your sense of wonder. And Disney parks are masters at evoking your sense of wonder. Happens many times a day. Let me give you one example. First time we went to Disney World, that's my daughter in the middle there and her cousin next to her. They're the same age. And we took them both. None of us had ever been to Disney World before. The girls were 14. Now, 14 is when you start getting too cool for most things. But these girls were not too cool for Disney World. They loved it. From the moment we got there, they were into it. This picture was taken at the Magic Kingdom. We've been there all day, and it was nighttime, and there's a nighttime parade there called Spectral Magic. And the cool thing about it is everything in the parade has lights on it. Not just the floats, but people walking down the street have light bulbs all over them. The battery cost has to just be incredible, but every character, every float, everything that goes by is lighted. And it's so beautiful to see at night when all the other lights are out. Well, we were standing there. We were way back in the back part of the park because we thought it won't be crowded back there. We'll be able to see the parade well. And we staked out a spot back there. Well, these two guys on the left, these are cast members. Disney doesn't call them employees. They're cast members because they are part of the show. These two cast members came along. Their job was to clear the place where the parade was going to come, to set up the ropes. You could just barely see the rope at the bottom. The ropes and the stanchions to keep everybody out of the parade route. Well, here's 2 teenage girls, and here's 2 boys. Conversation ensues. So they start talking, and the boys from somewhere produce hula hoops. And they talk the girls into getting out in the middle of the sidewalk, doing hula hoops with them as we're waiting for the parade to start. It was fun. The girls were embarrassed, but they're the kind of embarrassed that, means they really are loving the attention the teenage girls have, So it was getting close to the parade time. The guy on the left tells the girls, all right, girls, I'm going to show you something cool. He says, hold your hands out like this. So both of them hold their hands out. He says, now I'm going to sprinkle some pixie dust in your hands. And he goes like that. And then he says, all right, I'm going to count to 3. And when I get to 3, I want you to blow your pixie dust like that. So the girls are thinking, okay, what's the deal here? So they're standing there with their hands held out, and he says, 1, 2, 3. And every light in the park goes out. Every light in the park goes out. And then this beautiful parade starts with all the lighted floats and all the lighted characters begins to pass by. Now, you think those girls believed in pixie dust after that? They sure did, and so did their old man. I stood there thinking, that is the coolest thing I have ever seen in my life. It, for an instant, made us believers in magic, to make us believers in this non-existent pixie dust. Now, if you go to Disney World, you're going to encounter lots of pixie dust. And Disney loves to do it in places you don't even expect it. There's photographers everywhere you go, Disney photographers. And frequently they will say, can I take your picture? A lot of people don't even stop. We stopped at every one. And we let them take our pictures. And after a while, we would do weird things in our pictures just to be different. But sometimes the photographers would say, okay, I want you to pose a certain way. And they would tell us just how to pose. And then when we got our pictures back, we would look and there would be a little pixie dust even in the middle of the picture. Or he would tell Lisa and I to stand this way and hold your hands and look, there's little baby Simba. Or we'd be sitting on a bench and they would tell us to look this way, and when we got the pictures back.
That's hilarious.
This is me over here, by the way. Pixie dust is everywhere. And that's what keeps the wonder alive in people that visit there. And it's the best part of Disney to me, is the sense of wonder you have. There are endless things to see and do. It's not even animated characters. I ran into this lady quite by accident. We were in the animal kingdom, which is all themed as Africa and Asia. Beautiful jungle foliage and buildings that look like they were there, been there for 500 years. And the girls were sitting, and I was going to a concession stand to get us something to drink. And I was walking this path along the back of the park, and I ran into this woman. Well, actually, I just saw this ivy climbing up the side of a building. And then all of a sudden, the ivy pulls away from the building and starts walking down the path. It's not something you see every day. And I watched this woman move. She's like 12 feet tall. But she moves with such grace. She moves like a dancer. And I watched her interact, and I fortunately had my little camera in my pocket and snapped a couple of pictures. And then I went and told the girls, I said, we got to go back and see this thing. And so we found out when she was going to be returning, and we were there. And if you think she's beautiful in still shot, you should see what she does when there are people around.
Wow. Very nice.
Now that's about when I started crying. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Because here's this ethereal creature moving gracefully along, and she sees this little child in a wheelchair, and she reaches out one of those 10-foot long arms, and the child touches the leaves on that, and then she forms herself into a canopy and makes a bridge, makes a safe place for this child to pass through. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. That goes from being a character in Disney World, that goes to being a minister. This lady's name is Divine, the living vine. And what she did was divine. That was a beautiful thing. And that's the kind of things you get to see when you have your eyes open and you're walking through this magical world that Walt Disney has created. There is magic everywhere. Now, you could watch any Disney movie and find the messages in it, and you know those messages. A lot of them recur over and over again. One theme that is in a lot of Disney movies has to do with the misfit, the person who does not fit in, who is different from everybody else because it has maybe what people would call a defect or a handicap or some anomaly that makes them stand out, and everybody thinks, you are worth less than we are because you are different. Like, let me take you back to your childhood now. When the stork delivers a bundle to Mrs. Jumbo on a circus train in Florida.
Oh, do hurry, dear. I'm on pins and needles. Isn't it thrilling? I'm all aflutter.
Ah, this is a proud, proud day.
Well, hurry and open it, dearie.
I'm just dying to see.
Oh!
Look at him.
Look at him.
Oh, you sweet little He is cute. He is the darling little
Adorable. Simply adorable.
Did you ever see anything so cunning? Isn't he a darling?
Coochie, 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 coochie. Is it possible?
Isn't there some mistake?
Just look at those E-A-R-S.
Those what? Oh, ears! Oh, these! Aren't they funny?
Oh,
Why,
why?
what a temper.
What did I do? Well, tell me, did I say anything?
Perfectly harmless remark.
I just said that they're funny, and they are funny.
They certainly are.
After all, who cares about her precious little Jumbo?
Jumbo. You mean Dumbo.
Dumbo.
Well, you know the rest of the story. Dumbo's made to feel like an idiot. They actually make a clown out of him in the circus because they think he's just a figure to be mocked and made fun of. And yet, what happens? Those big ears turn out to be the source of an amazing ability, and this little elephant turns out to be able to fly. I know because I rode on him one time. No, several times. My daughter loved to ride on the Dumbo ride. But he turns out to be a hero because, not in spite of, but because of what everybody else said was a defect. Now that's got Bible all over it, folks. That's the same story as Moses and David and Peter and Saint Dumbo. The story of the guy who did not fit in, but yet had a purpose that was foreordained. A purpose. God loves to pick people who are ill-suited, seemingly, for their job. And he says, you think that's a problem that this person has? Let me show you. It's not a problem, it's an asset. And so that story is reflected in many, many Disney movies, the story of Dumbo. And we learn from these movies our differences are what allows us to soar. That's why the tagline for this class, wings, don't settle, soar. You can sit around feeling sorry for yourself. You can say, well, you know, my marriage didn't work out. I guess nobody likes me. Or you can say, you know what? God's made me me. And when you start loving who God made you to be, then you develop the power Dumbo had. You develop the power to soar above everything around you. Well, Walt Disney had so many good things to say, so many quotes. Let me share this one with you. He said, somehow I can't believe there are any heights that can't be scaled by a man who knows the secret of making dreams come true. This special secret, it seems to me, can be summarized in 4 C's. They are curiosity, confidence, courage, and constancy. And the greatest of these is confidence. When you believe a thing, believe it all the way, implicitly and unquestionably. He practiced that. People said, Disneyland is not going to work. He said, yes, it will. I'm committing everything I have. Even if I end up penniless, I'm committing to it. How many times in your life have you committed to something in spite of what it might cost you? In spite of everybody saying, that's not a good idea. If I were you, I wouldn't do that. It can be the greatest thing you ever did. It's interesting to me that he says the most important one of these 4 C's is confidence. And notice he doesn't even mention creativity. Walt Disney was not a great artist. He never wrote a book. He was not a great author. But yet he could see things. He could come up with inspirations and ideas, and then he could say, how can we make this reality? Well, I need this person and this person and this person and this person and sometimes hundreds of people, and he could share his vision with them and they could make it happen. And that's a gift. That is a huge spiritual gift that Walt Disney had that would be a wonderful thing for any of us to have. Here's another quote by him talking about the bad things that happened to him. He didn't want to forget them. He didn't regret them. He said, all the adversity I've had in my life, all my troubles and obstacles have strengthened me. You may not realize it when it happens, but a kick in the teeth may be the best thing in the world for you. Now that's a rare feeling. That's a rare feeling when we can look back at a moment in our life and say, oh, that was horrible. But Walt Disney said, and God says, count it all joy when all manner of terrible things happen to you. Why? Because you like terrible things to happen to me? No, because every one of them is a stepping stone to something bigger and better and greater. Gerald Mann used to always say, there is a yes in every mess. It may seem ugly at the time. It may seem like the end of the world. But Walt Disney had time after time when it looked like the end, and instead he used that as the way out to go on to something greater. It's a great lesson all of us could benefit by learning. Now here's a picture from that first Mickey Mouse cartoon, Steamboat Willie. I love the old Mickey Mouse, much better than the new Mickey Mouse. The old Mickey Mouse was an adventurer. If you go back and read the old Mickey Mouse comics from the 30s, Mickey Mouse was exactly like Indiana Jones. He went on adventures. He discovered things. He crawled inside pyramids and found ancient treasures. You know, they really wimped him out as the years went by. But the early Mickey was awesome. But I show you this picture to illustrate something that Walt Disney said a lot. In making his movies and building his parks, one thing he said a lot was, how can we plus the experience? Now, we don't use plus as a verb very often, but Walt Disney loved to use it as a verb. What did he mean by plus the experience? He meant don't just do what people are expecting. Just blow their minds with how much further beyond that you go. Now, I show you this to make this point. There's a reason my slides don't look like this. The words are the same. I could say, okay, Walt Disney says we're supposed to plus the experience. I could show you that slide, or I can show you this slide. And that's what Walt Disney's talking about. He said, when you walk into the park, how can we make that the best moment of your life? Now, if you've been to Disneyland, or if you've been to the Magic Kingdom at Disney World, you enter that park by going through a tunnel. It's under a train track. You picture that? There's 2 tunnels that go under a train track. When you get inside, you're on Main Street, USA, and there's that beautiful castle at the end of the road. Have you ever thought about why you enter through a tunnel? They could have put that train anywhere. You go in through a tunnel and a built-up hill because when you're inside Disneyland and you turn and look back, you don't see that parking lot with 8 million cars in it. You don't see the real world out there. You see this better world. You see this new world, this perfect world that Disney has created. He wanted the whole experience to be amazing, from the moment you walk in to the moment you leave at night. And there's stuff at Disney World that 99.9% of the people never experience or never even notice. There's a gift shop in the castle at the Magic Kingdom at Disney World, and in the back of the shop, there's a door. It says employees only. Normal thing. There's a little keyhole in this door. If you look through the keyhole, you can see Tinkerbell flying around inside the room. They don't advertise it. There's no sign that says, see Tinkerbell here, because if they did, there'd be a line forming there. But there are little touches like that everywhere. You walk down Main Street right after you enter the park, and there are little side streets where they have water fountains and trash cans and things like that. You stand on one of those side streets for a while, and from an open window up above these supposed houses that line the street, you'll hear the sounds of a woman taking a singing lesson and practicing her scales. She's not really up there. It's a recording, but it plays all the time. For who? For whoever stops at that spot. Another little byway like that, you'll hear a recording of dishes being washed in the kitchen, and you'll hear the occasional person yelling across the kitchen. It's all atmosphere. You'll never notice these things consciously. When you walk and you go from Adventureland to Frontierland, the music that's playing changes, and you won't even notice it. Not only that, the material that the sidewalk is made out of changes, and you won't even notice that. But once somebody calls it to your attention, you go, oh my gosh, that is so cool. Why did they think of that? How did they think of that? Disney World is full of endless details and little bits of magic that Walt Disney put in because he wanted to plus the experience. And this is a lesson I'm convinced that churches should learn. When we started this class five and a half years ago, I had no idea what I was going to do every Sunday. I just knew that I did not want to go to the Baptist bookstore and buy a quarterly and come in here and say, okay, we're in lesson number 2 in the quarterly today. Here's what it says. I wanted to plus even the mundane experience of going to Sunday school on Sunday morning. And you may think, well, this is church, it's not supposed to be entertaining. Oh, yeah? God is awfully entertaining. And God is the original person to put magic and awe and wonder all around us for us to notice. Now, why do I want to plus this experience for you? I would get paid just the same thing if I stood up here and read out of a quarterly, but I don't think you would get the same thing out of it. My goal, as it was Walt Disney's goal, as it is the goal of Jesus, to inspire people to do amazing things after you leave here. It's not just for you to sit here and go, wow, that was sure weird what Mike did today. Hopefully the goal, well, not hopefully, my goal is for you to leave and say, you know what? I need to do something. I need to write the next page of my life and have something happen. I need to quit sitting around waiting for life to happen to me, and I need to go out and make it happen. I need to decide what I'm going to do. I need to be excited. I need to experience wonder and awe. I need to awaken that child that is sleeping inside me that I have beat down and said, no, stay in there. I'm a grown-up now. You need to let that kid out and play. He or she is just dying to come out and let you see things in a new way. That's why I want to plus this experience. That's why I'm grateful for the resources. I have this amazing giant screen here, and I got this wonderful computer, and it'll do anything I can dream up to put on it. And this is my art. This is my painting. This is my writing. This is my magic to try to plant something in your head that you will leave with and say, yeah, I want to do more. I want to do something else. Well, as I said, Walt Disney was not a great artist or writer, but he had this gift, and he knew this. If you inspire and challenge other people, you can just watch and be amazed at what they will come up with. Person after person who worked with Walt Disney said, you know, he never told me exactly what to do. He would just say, here's my idea. And then they would go away and they would amaze themselves at what came out of them. I've heard that story from songwriters, from ride designers, from park designers. All the Imagineers that worked for Walt Disney said, I never knew I could come up with something that cool. But Walt planted the seed in us, and we went out and did amazing things. I think that's how God wants us to work too. He wants to plant a seed in us, and then he wants us to go out and do amazing things. All too often, we come in and we get the seed planted, and then we go, okay, I'm just going to save this seed. And we got a whole drawer full of seeds at home and wonder why our garden's not doing very well. All our seeds are just sitting around waiting to sprout, waiting to be fertilized, waiting to be nourished, waiting to grow. I like this quote by Walt Disney too. He said, my business is making people, especially children, happy. What a great way to live your life. What's your purpose in life? What's your business in life? Not what you get a paycheck for. What is your purpose in life? My purpose in life is to make other people happy. That's an admirable goal right there. And I would say Walt Disney has succeeded millions and millions and millions of times over in making people happy. A couple of years ago, they had a promotion, Disney had a promotion called the Year of a Million Dreams. And they committed to, over the course of a year, making 1 million people feel special. And they did it in all kinds of ways. Some of them were very small ways. Some of them, you would come into Disneyland in the morning and they would say, your family gets to lead the parade today. Cool. Or they would show up as you get off of Space Mountain and they would say, here, we're giving you fast passes. You can ride every other ride without standing in line today. Awesome. Or they would come up to somebody and say, your family gets to spend the night in Sleeping Beauty's castle in the luxury suite there. They did 1 million of those a year, and I thought, that's a job I would like to have. How would you like to have the job of making 1 million people's day? Wouldn't that be cool? But I learned you can get a little taste of what that's like next time you go to the Magic Kingdom and you walk in there and you're walking down that road and you see the castle up there, and chances are you're going to smile. And chances are you're going to feel happy and you're going to feel a little bit of that awe and that wonder. But here's my advice to you. Turn around. Turn back the other direction and watch the faces of the children as they come in to that park for the first time. And they see Sleeping Beauty's castle up there and they say, it's real. This place is real. I'm so glad we're here. That's a beautiful sight. I could sit and watch that all day as people experience wonder and awe. And again, that's our business, to spread the wonder and the joy and the awe and the forgiveness that God offers each one of us. It's all here for us to share. In the New Testament, in the Greek New Testament, in the book of Matthew, there's a word that occurs over and over again, ecclesia. Anybody know what this means? If you know Spanish, you probably recognize iglesia. We translate that word church, but that's not really what that word is, because when they were using that word in writing the New Testament, there wasn't any such thing as a church. So what does ecclesia mean? Well, it means a community of people who share an experience. They didn't have a word for church. So they said, what do we call this? This is a group of people who've all experienced God's grace and their forgiveness of their sins and a promise of eternal life. We've all experienced that. It's an ecclesia. It's a shared experience group. And Disney specializes in just that. You get off the ride at Splash Mountain. You're riding with 4 strangers. And you get off the ride and all of you are soaked to the skin and everybody's laughing and everybody says, let's do that again. Or let's go see the picture of us doing that. That's what we're doing here. We are all here because of a shared experience. We are all here because a shared experience with God, or we're seeking a shared experience with God. And we come together with other people who have experienced like things and feel the same way we do and know what we're going through. And we get something from that experience. And then we say, let's do it again. And we come back together next Sunday to do it again. If the church would take a lot of cues from Disney and concentrate on building relationships, building experiences, building stories, and concentrate on that the same way Walt Disney does, what could we accomplish? What are the limits to what we could do? Well, I don't think there are any limits. There's no telling where we could go. I believe we could go to infinity and beyond, as my buddy Buzz Lightyear often says. MIC, see you next week. KEY, why? Because we love you.